Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, December 21st, 2021, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hey, that's me.
That is you. Happy holidays here, Trevor. This is the last pod before the Christmas break, I guess. You excited about the holiday season here?
I mean, it definitely feels like it has snuck up on me. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's also like I don't think I'm going to have like an extended break during the holidays. Like
Sure.
a lot of my company is taking the week off and getting like a recharge week, but I basically volunteered to work those shifts and take the time off next month instead. So I'll be working, but it's going to be like super light work and it should be pretty relaxed, pretty chill. But yeah, other than that, I'm squeezing in like the last couple games I want to try and get in before end of the year and just kind of relaxing, enjoying that. Got my COVID booster shot a couple days ago, so all that and my flu shot, and all recovered from that. So yeah.
I got my booster scheduled today, actually, for next week. So I'll knock that out then, because it's popping off in Austin. Everywhere getting scheduled, booked up. So I got that scheduled for next week. Get that taken care of. I recently, probably in the last couple of weeks, have really started falling into a NBA Live 2018 rabbit hole. Because the last NBA Live, second to last NBA Live they made, because NBA 2K, as we talked about in this pod a couple of weeks ago, not very good. So went to NBA Live, playing that, while I just stockpile Deathloop and Life is Strange for next week, which I'm so excited for, just to binge through those. Yeah, it's been a good little kind of wind down to 2021 here. And in that, we got an early little holiday treat with some news out of the games industry over from gamesindustry.biz by Jeffrey Rousseau that talks about how we have our first unionized game studio in North America by Vodeo. I'm going to go with Vodeo Games.
It's
Vodeo Games.
Yeah.
That makes more sense, I guess.
Like video games, but with an O instead of an I.
With an O.
Which makes their SEO terrible, because I went to Google them, and they're like, "Did you mean video games?" And I went, "No, I actually meant Vodeo Games."
Like everyone else. Yes, this is from December 15th, so the day this last week's episode went live, in classic News You Care About fashion. But the piece goes into how last week, leadership from Vodeo Games formally recognized the formation of Vodeo Workers United to become the first certified game studio union in North America. It was formed with the Communication Workers of America and will represent all eligible employees across the entirety of job positions, both in the US and Canada as well. Some quick kind of pull quotes from the gamesindustry.biz article. We have, quote, "All workers deserve a union." Really could have just ended there. But it continues, "and a say in how their workplace is run, no matter where they work, what their employment status is, or what kind of conditions they work under," said Vodeo Games producer Miriam Leprechelle. I'm going to go with maybe French. Quote, "We've been inspired by the growing worker organizing within the game industry and hope we can set a new precedent for industry-wide standards that will better our shared working conditions and inspire others to do the same," end quote. Obviously, as me and Trevor have talked about repeatedly on this podcast throughout the last couple of years, the game industry seems like it's in a really, I think, transitory place right now, Trev, as we kind of gotten into, as it's kind of emboldened worker movement, like it's kind of discussed in this article, demanding kind of better working conditions, a real, I think, dealing with crunch culture and workplace culture in general, and kind of working conditions, harassment conditions, and a better, I think, managing of management and worker relations, and kind of culminated in repeated instances of, unions are good. They help solve some of these issues. So to finally get to the point where we finally have our first, game studio unionized within North America, I think it is something that both me and you were happy to see. What were your kind of initial reactions when you saw the news when it broke last week now?
Yeah, I think the first thing I saw was, I think, the tweet that was basically like the statement of support from the studio itself, which I want to go ahead and read out here. It's from Asher Vollmer, founder and game co-director over at Vodeo Games. Vodeo Games has been a proud pro-worker studio from its very inception. We have always had 4-day work weeks, unlimited vacation days with an enforced minimum, and a fully remote studio before it became standard practice. And we are always discussing other possible improvements. We are a small, young company, and I constantly encourage my coworkers to speak up and tell us how we can do better. So when they approached me and told me they were forming Vodeo Workers United, it was a no-brainer to step back and proudly watch them do what no other game company in North America has. I look forward to continuing to create incredible games with the brilliant minds at Vodeo. Again, that was Asher Vollmer, founder and game co-director. Prior to kind of founding Vodeo Games, he's probably best known for being the creator of the game Threes on mobile devices. And admittedly, like, this is a studio I had not heard about prior to this. I didn't know his name prior to this, but I knew Threes, and I knew that probably has made him bank, and so he can absolutely kind of like run his own small studio. But yeah, kind of seeing like how supportive he is of his workers doing this. It's fascinating because I'm somebody who grew up when I was born, Reagan was president. I grew up in Arizona, a right to work state. So for like the longest time, like unions and stuff were like beaten into me of like, they're a bad thing. Like it's great that you live in Arizona and we're a right to work state because you don't have to join a union. And like the propaganda over like, the decades, of my own life, like breaking through that and kind of realizing like who was paying for that messaging and who was kind of leading that messaging, to get to this point in the games industry and watching things in the games industry, especially obviously with all the stuff that's been going on with Ubisoft in recent years, with Activision Blizzard King. Because this was a week after Activision Blizzard like workers put out their what is it? It's not a GoFundMe, is it? Oh yeah, it is a GoFundMe. The ABK Strike Fund, that they're trying to basically like, because they are trying to start a union and kind of put the resources together for that. So seeing kind of this studio I'd never heard of kind of take charge. It's one of those things, like we've talked many a time of how great it would be to see like a Naughty Dog or like a name studio be the ones to take charge. And obviously I think we've seen in recent years, we've heard enough stories in recent years to know that it wasn't going to be Naughty Dog, because Naughty Dog suffers significant crunch and has terrible work culture issues. But like seeing a big studio is kind of what we thought we would see, as like they'll lead the charge. So the fact that it's a studio that we hadn't heard of, but like has, just small indie heart and roots. I hope that now they can be used as a template for other studios trying to move forward with this in the future. And I think hopefully this will be like, the dam breaks and all sorts of other studios will kind of take point and say, if they could do it, we can absolutely do it.
I think there's something to be said to that point of maybe we were always mistaken in our belief that take a line from Barack Obama, that change came from the top, right? And that instead maybe that change comes from the bottom and kind of bubbles up from there, right? When we see one small indie studio kind of be unionized, and then that can kind of inspire other smaller indie level studios of similar sizes and nature to also start to unionize, so that before you know it, these smaller studios being unionized is more the norm than it is the exception. And that starts to force its way up to bigger studios, obviously, as some of those people try to go to AAA teams and AAA studios and developers. They're then going to want to carry forward some of those things to those studios and to those studios' cultures, right? And, there's something to be said for that as well, of kind of these small teams. And, this is a team of 13 people. Half of them are independent contractors, right? And they're the ones who took this step that really can have potentially really profound implications for the rest of the games industry. And I find that so exciting, right? And this is an issue that plagues not just the developer side of things, but also the press, content creator, whatever we call it nowadays, side of the industry as well. And I hope just as kind of Vice and Waypoint help lead the way for that side of the industry, this can lead the way for the developer side of the industry. And these two kind of can show that it can be done, can show what works and doesn't work potentially, as you kind of see it unfold, and then can kind of provide that template for other studios, right? Like, I think maybe it always had to be done by a team of 13 people, but someone still had to do it, right? And I find it super exciting, right? And I think with a studio like this, where the workplace culture seems like it was already really good, right? With 4-day work weeks and remote and so many kind of benefits that are being offered, the decision to go ahead and unionize probably was a really seamless and easy one, and it won't always be that way, obviously, as you kind of get to other studios where maybe that culture isn't as ingrained, or you just get to larger studios in general. But I'm still really excited about this. I still think it's still a big step, and one with potentially a lot of positive ramifications for the industry as a whole. And maybe one day we'll get to a point where Naughty Dog can kind of turn around and be one of the first big studios that unionizes, right? And kind of really works on improving the culture. And while unionizing isn't a one cure, kind of solves all the problems that ail a particular studio, it is something that is a strong plus in the column of worker safety and worker, I think, workplace culture, and improvements in that regards. And it's interesting that you talked about how, working in Arizona, it's right to work state, and working and growing up in the Reagan era, and how, being taught the scourge of unions. And then from my end of thing, right, half my family's background are just teachers, right? So being in teachers unions, just a thing that I didn't even question, right? Unions just in the household from the jump, basically. And so to have that kind of other perspective, and also kind of grown up in more of a Rust Belt-y adjacent area where unions are very kind of common, it is so interesting to kind of still get that unions are bad, unions, destroy jobs and steal workers' dollars rhetoric, and then seeing kind of, well, they seem pretty beneficial in this house at the very least. I don't know, guys. And kind of, I think, being able to see up close the fallacy of some of the arguments that were used against unions. Like we talked about, by people who maybe had some biases and why they didn't like unions very much. Go figure. Yeah, I'm definitely kind of curious to see where you think this can potentially butterfly effect across the rest of the industry.
I mean, yeah, I think it is okay, these guys have done it. Yes, they're a small team, and yes, they're a team that isn't going to significantly benefit from this union because the company was already doing a lot of those things. I think that's kind of the gist I've seen a lot of times on why smaller studios haven't unionized is smaller studios are already kind of doing a better job about, managing work-life balance and kind of the culture of their small studios. Obviously they're, going to be, bad apples in a lot of those cases as well. But I think that's why a smaller studio, or why we wouldn't have like associated a smaller studio with being like the ones to unionize, because what are they going to benefit from doing that unionization thing? But I think now that these guys have, again, they've laid out the template for other small studios that maybe do want to kind of have those things. Obviously, like we talked about, what the studio behind Season, or Gone Home Studio. What's
Fulbright?
Yeah, Fulbright. There you go. Like, both of those have had significant stories about like toxic culture issues in this past year, and are probably of a relatively comparable size to these guys. So maybe they can kind of compare notes and now say, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and make these steps. And then I think we can kind of start kind of moving up and start getting like AA studios, and then eventually the AAAs, hopefully follow suit. If not, I mean, because while this is all happening, again, Activision Blizzard could be making the moves that they're making right now. And if they get enough, support among kind of their colleagues and teams, they might be able to kind of hit the next big one, or the next one might be one of the biggest ones in the industry, if they can kind of pull that off. So you could, then we end up having like, okay, let's attack it from both sides. Yeah. Now, like if ABK is able to do it, then they're the ones that can lay the template for Ubisoft, for EA, for Xbox, PlayStation, like the big ones. And it's like, because I'll be very curious, because we're talking about Naughty Dog here. I'm like, would it be Naughty Dog, or would like all of the Sony studios have to like get together and kind of do
That's
it?
A really interesting question.
But yeah, I think this is the first domino, and it's just a matter of time before the other ones start to fall. And I also want to just as an aside, I pulled up this Jason Schreier tweet, kind of in reaction to this, in response to this, because like, again, in response to the Activision Blizzard stuff, there was kind of that like internally leaked memo or email or whatever to the staff, where Activision management, union busting management, basically said, you should really consider the consequences of your signature on the binding legal document of, signing a union card, versus Vodeo Games basically coming out and saying, yeah, it was a no-brainer to step back and let them do this. Like he basically tweeted it out as two very different management reactions to workers organizing. So yeah, I hope very much that this is a sign of things to come, and lays a good groundwork for where the rest of the industry goes from here.
I think to kind of pivot to that secondary kind of idea that you just brought up with Jason Schreier's tweet, there is, I think, a endemic current within certainly American, we'll kind of confine it to that culture of workers being, I think, for like a commodity of the company they work for.
I mean, we're recording this like the week or so after tornadoes hit, Amazon. and Amazon workers were basically told that they had to like stay, in the warehouse, and led to many, many deaths. So yeah, they are absolutely seen as like a commodity, as just another resource.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is this element of, and you can trace it back obviously to like the Pullman strikes from like the 1800s, right? But companies not understanding that workers are also people, and even more seemingly logically understanding that happy workers are probably going to be better at their job. But that very simple piece of knowledge and understanding has seemed to elude corporate culture for 100 years, right? With a couple of exceptions along the way, right? Or they misunderstand worker happiness for being things like, here's your quarterly happy hour, while not having any sort of pay progression or raises or bonuses or time off or parental leave, like the things that workers actually care about, right? Like the 6 o'clock Applebee's happy hour was a nice event, but if it was between that and like a month of parental leave, I think most people would probably pick one of those versus the other. And I think the video industry is particularly bad about this because they, unlike a lot of other jobs, can trade off of passion. They can trade off of, this is my dream, this is something I love, right? And in some ways, I feel like the closest parallel to the video game industry and being able to utilize that aspect is actually in sports, where franchises are able to capitalize on players chasing their dreams and want to do anything possible to make it happen. And so, a lot of people talk about the LeBron James and, Tom Brady's and, Mike Trout's of the relative sports worlds, but most players aren't those guys. Most players play for a couple years, like the average NFL career lasts for like 3 years. The average in basketball probably lasts something similar. Baseball, maybe even less, right? Because baseball's got 3 different tiers before you get to the majors. And those are the guys who are the ones who are kind of put just through the grinder, right? And literally this season in baseball, a lot of the major league players started to actually kind of protest against the treatment of minor leaguers who work incredible hours, and drive long distances, get like no sleep, and get paid basically nothing to do it. Because if you don't want to do this, you can leave and there's 100 guys willing to do the job for you, which is such a reminiscent thing to video game industry, either on the developer side or definitely on the press side of things, right, and the content creation side of things. Right, if you don't want to work at IGN, you can leave and we'll find someone in about 5 seconds. And so I think that is a particularly kind of poisonous strand throughout the industry of knowing that you have so many willing applicants, right? The demand far outstrips the number of positions that you can kind of do whatever you want, it seems like, from a corporate perspective. And that can't help but cloud, I think, the corporate judgment, right? And the decisions they make and how they view the people that are working for them and how they view the people that make up these companies. And, it requires some level of humanity, which is not necessarily something that corporations are known for having in abundance, to recognize that that might be true, but we're still a stronger company, we're still a better company, and we're going to be a more successful company if we can kind of treat our workers like people, as revolutionary as that thought might be. I don't know.
Yeah, I pulled up the "nobody wants to work anymore" memes that have been making the rounds for the last couple years, of business after business losing employees and unable to hire new people, and so they've put signs on their doors saying nobody wants to work. It's like, no, somebody wants to work for you because you underpay and don't offer benefits, and people are tired of that shit. People aren't looking for that during a global pandemic where you're much more interested in them serving your need rather than you serving their, societal needs or their living needs. So yeah, it's hopefully there is a broader communal thing going on there as well, that is also feeding into all of this mess.
That's what I was going to actually bring up next, is the role of the pandemic in all of this, right? You already kind of touched on, obviously, no one wants to work at McDonald's or Taco Bell or Sonic or whatever it might be, memes and I feel like news stories you see once a week. What do you think the role of the pandemic and the disruptive force it's had throughout seemingly every single aspect of society has played in both kind of the upswing of the workers' rights movements within the video game industry, leading obviously now to the first unionized studio in North America, and then potentially what those ramifications can be going forward as a rail, right? Because we very much are on the door of potentially being in like a paradigm shift in terms of how workers view work and what that relationship should be.
I mean, I think one of the biggest elements is the proliferation of work from home or remote work. Because I think that's one of the things you often see in the games industry is people burning out of the industry because every few years they have to move from San Francisco to Austin to Bethesda to like
North Carolina,
and that they're having to kind of hop around the country for those jobs to chase after those next jobs. And if the industry has kind of identified and realized, well, there can be a work from home element to this, so you don't need to move everybody in your company to the most expensive states in the country, or most expensive cities in the country. There's so much more value to those employees if you keep them, in the middle of nowhere or wherever they want to live, as long as you can provide them the resources to do that. That there's
and so many more people that the company can draw to them too.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is it significantly increases their potential applicant pool. People that work for Ubisoft or something like that might kind of think, oh well, we're stuck. Like I can't I work at Ubisoft Montreal. I'm not going to be able to find another opportunity somewhere else or something like that. But if they can work remotely and another company is willing to kind of work with them in that regard, that gives them significantly more power in the bargaining department of that negotiation. So I think that is the significant shift that really has kind of made so much of this more possible. Because it's the kind of thing like we'd been talking about for years of there's relatively back in those days of the dream of working at IGN or something like that, I would gladly consider that if I didn't have to move to San Francisco and suddenly room with 5 other people just to try and pay rent, because they're not going to pay me San Francisco living wages. And so now that they're allowing that kind of thing, or allowing people to work remotely and kind of deal with that, now they've got a significantly broader applicant pool. Same with GameSpot, same with a whole bunch of the other studios. So I think, or publishers. Outlets, I think that's the key thing that really has kind of shaken everything up. And then I think on the flip side, everybody suddenly needing healthcare, and ideally good healthcare, and not just kind of whatever the company paid the least amount for. That benefit becomes a much bigger ask in a job application or in your search. You're looking for specific things that otherwise you might have been like, okay, I'll take, just speaking from my own personal experience, the position I'm in right now, I'm getting my salary is exactly what it has been the last couple jobs I've had, but my healthcare is completely paid for at this position, whereas in the others it was partially paid for or whatever. So that, subconsciously / as a actual perk of the job increases the value proposition of this job I have now. So I think that's another huge selling point for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think an event of the force of the pandemic these past 2 years will inevitably shake up how people view the world and view both their careers and lives and lifestyles and a plethora of other kind of things within the world. But I think you kind of hit the head on the nail in terms of how they view healthcare, and also a increasingly important topic kind of tied into that same vein of like parental leave, right? Whether paternal or maternal, becoming an increasingly bigger, not even ask, increasingly bigger demand from employers. And then also the ability to work from home, right? There is just simply, I think, by being forced to work from home, millions of people realized how unnecessary it is for them to actually work in an office with other people. Like so many of the day-to-day tasks can just be worked from home. And then, yeah, you can fly in, right? If you live in North Carolina to Seattle, once a quarter, whatever it might be, to go to a big, game dev pitch meeting or something like that. But you don't need to live in that city, or you don't need to live in that location. And it's the same for GameSpot or IGN or anything like that. And it's the same for regular office jobs, right? Like so much of the mundane day-to-day work just doesn't need to be done in an office anymore. And I think kind of the curtain was pulled back on that, like the Wizard of Oz, and they saw that this is really just for show. There's no point in all of us being here. And I think that is among the most lasting changes that'll be wrought from the pandemic, is a increasing, certainly, acceptance of the idea of a hybrid schedule, right? Or just work from home in general. Because people have seen that they can function from their job totally fine, right? Like this isn't, 1995 where working from home just meant you dicking off and going to the movies. People can actually perform their jobs very well, right? And there's numerous studies you can find where people are better at their jobs working from home, and the workers are happier, right? And so both those things from a corporate bottom line are good for you. And so that is one of the changes I think will be most lasting from the pandemic. It just affords so much flexibility to workers and to the companies too, because again, they can pull from a significantly larger pool of applicants, like you kind of alluded to. Yeah, I mean, I am very curious to see what direction and shape the game industry continues to evolve in, as we kind of go through this pandemic and then its eventual kind of aftermath and after effects. But I think unquestionably this surge in this kind of increasingly emboldened workers movement is one that is not going to get any quieter, right? They have made gains, and I think they've made their voice known across multiple studios and across multiple aspects of the industry. And I can only hope and only expect them to continue to kind of grow and continue to advance the cause of workers' rights across the industry. And that's what I would hope would happen as well. Otherwise, any final thoughts or comments to say, Trevor?
No, not on that. I do have a shout out if we're doing that though.
What is your shout out?
So this is an article called "Why Queer Star Wars Fans Are So Upset at Its Newest Video Game, Saga." It's from Gizmodo, and it's basically an article by James Whitbrook discussing the very controversial decision for like Lucas Arts Games to hand over the Star Wars Eclipse to Quantic Dream. Obviously, Quantic Dream, no stranger to shows like this or Input in the past, and the issues that they have in the industry. So the fact that they were kind of a big showcase piece of the Game Awards a couple weeks ago. A lot of fans in the Star Wars fandom who do not stand for David Cage and his kind of toxic reputation are very upset and disappointed by that.
I think one of the elements, I actually have thoughts on this. I think one of the elements of of the Star Wars community and fandom and franchise and series that I've always really loved is it to me has always been a series that it is so easy to find yourself in. I think George Lucas is someone who's got a weird and absurdist and countercultural and counterculture background and ideology and worldview. And he is someone who is kind of unambiguously leftist and, you know, anti-establishment and progressive. And I think you see that reflected in his super weird, goofy, cartoonish, colorful, lively universe that he's created here, right? And there's, I think, a Star Wars story or a Star Wars character for every one of us. And there's a lot of ambiguity in the Star Wars universe. And it is a series that I have long kind of prided on being almost openly almost openly disregards any sort of attempt to attach lore to it and build out a lore structure, right? Like Star Wars just doesn't care for your lore. If you want it, you've got Wikipedia to go to, and it's there. You've got the Expanded Universe books, but they're always just other things. They're always just other stories, right? And it never really matters. And in some ways, someone who's just done a Star Wars Rewatch podcast this summer, Star Wars is actually weakest when it tries to incorporate lore into its story. It doesn't work as well. That's not what these stories are meant to be. That's not what this world and universe is meant to be. And so, you know, I think Star Wars is a universe where you can find a safe place, I think, and find characters that resonate with you and that identify like you and that look like you and that, you know, kind of have the same heart as you, which I think is all a kind of a long way to say it's even more of a weird decision to then pick a studio like Quantic Dreams to shepherd a Star Wars game. Because Quantic Dream is none of those things. Quantic Dream is a studio that is run by a Sun King who thinks the world is flat and revolves around him. And so, you know, I think it's pretty upsetting. It's actually one of the more disappointing aspects of certainly the Game Awards for me, but just Star Warsness in general for me. Because it's sort of antithetical to everything Star Wars aspires to be, and it just is, right? And, you know, I think the game can be good or bad or everything in between. That's sort of irrelevant right now because we know nothing about the game. But I think in terms of its reveal, I think in terms of, you know, all of the talented studios that exist in the game industry that can tell really cool interactive story-based games, just I assume is what they're going for here. I mean, you could look at any of the Life is Strange games or any of the Until Dawn kind of series of games, or even Telltale, bring them back from the dead. Right? Like, they're almost all better than, hell, get Kyle Seeley to do it. They're almost all better than Quantic Dream, right? And that legacy that it's kind of built up. And, you know, maybe David Cage is a changed man. I find it unlikely, but I will, I guess, allow the possibility that it has happened. But I still think what a disappointing opening note to launch a game on. And yeah, I mean, I'll be curious to see what they do. I'll be curious to hear, I'm sure, the stories that come out from Quantic Dream, for good or for ill, about what it's like working there and what's it like working on this game. But just from my initial kind of gut reaction as someone who is, you know, someone who loves Star Wars very much, it's so disappointing. And I hope to be proven wrong on what Quantic Dream is like during the production of this game. But otherwise, that's the show. If you like what you heard, you can go check us out over at youtube.com/thatnerdysite, or go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest reviews, features, op-eds, written features, podcasts, all the good jazz going live over there. You can also go check us out on all kinds of podcast services around the globe, including iTunes, and rate and review us. Give us 5 stars, tell your friends all about us, and help spread the good word of news you care about and all the good content at That Nerdy Site. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor Starkey at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I'll plug That D Plus show, which we've been doing our holiday-themed episodes all month long. Last week's episode was me and Logan sitting down talking Jingle All the Way. It was a fun little one. This week's episode going to be basically the finale / season wrap up of Hawkeye, since they went ahead and set that whole series here in the holiday block of time. Go check out That D Plus show.
You can go check out all of my happenings at Lefty Logie or Lefty Loggy, Loggy on the internet. I will echo those excellent shoutouts. Jingle All the Way is a ton of fun. You can also stay tuned to next week's episode of That D Plus show, which will be the last one for December, where we're going to do the first episode of the Book of Boba Fett. I will be on that episode. I'm very excited.
Good to know.
Love some good Star Wars happenings, even if Boba Fett being brought back is maybe not. But anyway, we'll get into that on the podcast itself, I'm sure. Otherwise, you can stay tuned to all the happenings and Let's Plays going live on YouTube, as well as all of these podcasts. And be excited for all of the good 2021 end of the year content and early 2022 content coming ahead as well. We are getting close to Game of the Year, end of the year content. We were talking about it before we did this podcast. It's going to be very exciting. It's going to be very long. There will be lots of it. Will there be top 10 written features? Almost certainly. So stay excited and stay tuned for all of that as well. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good with each other. Class dismissed. And happy holidays. It's a fun extra one.